Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about SurrealEstate Season 2, Episode 4. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, let's talk about Zoe. It's her first official day as the realtor. So I guess at some point, Susan got the notice. I think maybe that's why she felt even more comfortable. Well, obviously with everything going on, she needed to just get away from everything. But I think it's also like she knew like, oh, like some of my listings, we could give them the Zoe and stuff like that. She'll be able to handle them. So, well, some of the clientele list and hand it over to Zoe, which she gets a couple this episode who are kind of the looky-loos, as they call them, because no matter what, when you show them off a place, it's never quite good enough. They're always like looking at places, nothing's ever quite right. And so Zoe's kind of getting driven a little insane, and it's just like they just look and they just never buy. And especially because this is like her first like official gig, it's just kind of like these people are so draining, and it's a lot to process. And so she's even later on talking to him like, hey, you actually going to buy a house this time or not? Do you think you're really going to do it? And they're like, we haven't really decided, because they're looking for particular stuff. And it's just so aggravating because apparently even Susan's kind of run the gamut. No one's been able to sell them a house, like obviously because like to the point like Phil and Luke were laughing the moment they heard that this is the couple that Zoe was going to get. But I think it's so interesting that the best advice she got came from the most unexpected place. It was Rita, and her kind of like laying it down by being like, yeah, like let me give you some advice. The fact of the matter is I always thought you were kind of like really good, Zoe. I always thought you were kind of something special. And it's like, right, remember, because she talks about the fact is of her journey from like, oh, she studied philosophy. She got a degree in philosophy, but it's like, yeah, that didn't really help her in the realtor department. So it's like, cool. Then she had to shift up how she did things. That still didn't work. But then she changed her mindset. I start aiming not for what the client wants, but what they need, which isn't always mutually exclusive, they don't always equate to the same thing. Because she's like, right, a lot of people, your boss included, still have that dumb notion that the client is right. It's like, no, you're smarter than the client. That's always something to remember. And Zoe and her vibed on that, because Zoe's kind of like, yeah, they kind of are. It is something like, yeah, we know what's best for you because we know what you need versus all this other BS you're getting wrapped up in what you want. So it was really interesting because like obviously Zoe and Rita don't vibe, but they kind of gelled this episode, and it's like, and it's like, yeah, like I said, Luke is still under the impression like a lot of people that, oh, the clients are smart, but it's like, no, they're idiots. They don't know they don't know what's best for them. We do. So Zoe applied that, and I loved how she handled it. It's like, oh, there's two places left on Susan's list, and we're passing by that one. Oh, can we check it? And nope, we're not even going to look at it because it's this, and this. That's not going to match what you want. Oh, this next one. Oh, nope, we're not doing that either. What? Can we at least look? Nope. And so it's like, I've got the perfect place for you. And it's actually, they were kind of jazzed about, kind of like, okay, like she's revving up the car and just speeding ahead, being, yeah. And the final place ends up being the place. And I thought it was so beautiful and amazing how Zoe handled it. It's just kind of like, oh, like you don't need, because they needed like a basement area. But it's like, oh, you don't need it. It's for storage. And just imagine not what this place is, but imagine what it can be, essentially. It's just like, oh, yeah, like, you're cooking in here, you're doing this, you're doing that. She's selling them kind of on the dream of the place. You're so focused on what you want and the place not having it versus like this place being what it can be, being a home, and you making it something. You vision yourself here like later on down the line and what this place can be as a home. So ended up selling them on it. Problem is, it's one of Rita's places, and it's like, well, how do I handle that? And it's like, well, it's like I kind of sold Rita's play, so we're still potentially friends, right? I'm like, I don't know if she was saying that specifically for Luke, or was she saying that with the complicated relationship they have with Rita? I don't know which way she was kind of spinning that, but I just thought that was so interesting. It's like, yeah, I mean, it worked in the end because they ended up selling, and even Luke congratulated her on it. But for her, the downside is that she feels like she sold her soul because she's kind of part of that clique now of like, oh yeah, we're kind of like a group of powerful women in this place, and they're like, oh, kind of like they're just everything Zoe isn't, even to the point that she was kind of like stuck in this trance where she's looking at them, and they're like, oh, where'd you get your nails done? It's like, I did it myself, and it's like, and then she sees herself in this pink suit kind of joining them, and she's like, no, kind of losing her individuality, and I become part of the group rather than kind of going my own ways. I just thought that was so beautiful. And she's just like, yeah, I sold the house, but I had to sell my soul to do it. And it's kind of like, yeah, you kind of have to do that every day. You know, it's kind of part of the gig. It's just kind of like, yeah, you're taking your first steps towards the complicated nature that is a realtor. It's kind of like selling your soul a little bit, because you kind of have to bend over backwards to get the sale. That's the job, and you kind of have to do what you got to do, even if it kind of destroys you at your core a little bit to some extent, you know. So, and I love how that kind of entangles with the episode where, like, the house that Luke is handling, it turns out that the guy who wants it, what's the name? Like Eric, I think. He's like, oh, I want this property. I also want this other property too. It's like, money's not an option. I just want to buy it. Because he's like, I can't live in this place comfortably knowing that there's a property kind of nearby that's not owned by me. And I was like, that's very, I mean, once again, got to give the client what they want. But I'm also like, that's so weird that I'm like, that was his exact wording. I can't live comfortably knowing that place isn't mine. I was like, that's so effing weird. I guess it's just like a thing of like, this area needs to be mine. Maybe he's thinking like, oh, if it's not mine, then someone can kind of encroach upon my territory, my place, whatever the case may be. So, you have Luke trying to meet with the person who owns the place, which he meets her, and very beautiful lady. And I was like, well, because we saw whoever opened the door kind of have like because we saw someone looking through the window, and then we also saw someone like getting his business card off the doorknob. It's like that hand didn't match the very beautiful lady we saw. I was like, okay. My immediate thought was like, okay, as we're going through the episode, we keep cutting back to this thing about like missing children. And there's also like Zoe listened on the radio at one point in time. There was like, oh yeah, kind of like almost like 2.5 years ago, there was also these strings of like, I think dead bodies that were kind of found, like children or something. I was like, okay. And especially when Luke and her have their back and forth, and it's very flirtatious, which I was like, are you making a pattern this, homie? Like, had this happened before Megan? Because I'm like, this is the second time you're having, well, I mean, I guess it's a little different because it's like you were directly involved with getting Megan, like, you know, she was a client, but it's like this woman isn't really a client because she's someone you're doing business with for the sake of a client. So it's a little different, but it's kind of not, because you're still having to do business with. I'm like, I guess, I don't know if there's any ethical, if there's anything ethical or unethical about that. I mean, I don't remember it coming up at all, or anyone really saying too much about the whole Megan of it all last season. But it's like, yeah, like, you know, I mean, I guess this is the only way you're going to potentially, the best way to meet people. But the fact is, they kind of clicked immediately, and I was like, huh. I was like, what's her deal? And obviously she had talked about the place being in like her family for a long time. And so I was like, okay, because my immediate thought was like, all right, are we dealing with like especially when we got the reveal later on about the blood. I'm like, oh, because she had said this line when her and Luke were having their back and forth, where he was like, oh, can I bring you out at night? And she's like, nighttime is when I am busiest or whatever. She was kind of almost, or was she talking about daytime? There was one time she was like, oh, because she was making an excuse kind of not to be out in the day. I was like, are you a vampire or something? Like, what is that? She's like, my day or my night is full or something like that. Well, we can go out Friday or whatever. So I was like, are you a vampire? Then I was immediately like, succubus? Some combination of two? Turns out, no, she's a witch. Specifically, a Hungarian witch. Interestingly enough, I was like, wouldn't have guessed which. Because we did see, like, one of the kids got lured by a younger girl and she was a redhead. I was like, can you shapeshift or something? Which, technically, yes. Basically, she can change her age based on, like, that's kind of her power to lure people in, is changing her age. So it gave me God, what was her name? Was it Constance from Nancy Drew? Spoilers if you haven't seen the show Nancy Drew. There's a witch character that did literally the same thing. Basically made herself young by bathing in blood. I mean, I think that might be like some mythology of witches type of thing, of making yourself young in that capacity. But yeah, like, she's able to entice people, men and women. Men and boys. So that's what this whole like Luke being so infatuated with thing. That's where I was getting the succubus of it all, the way she was like luring him in. So I guess I kind of do not always attribute. When I think of someone being able to kind of seduce you like that, I think of like sirens or succubus. That's my immediate thought. I never really think of witches, but it's like, yeah, like witches can like, just like a vampire can compel you, a witch could have magic that can compel you. She's on kind of borderline some poison ivy. I guess it's almost like I don't know if it's like a pheromone thing or what her deal is of how she's able to kind of entrance you. It might, once again, just be a spell of look me in the eyes type of situation. But either way, it's also interesting because like they also introduced early on that she was also like something else was going on because Phil tested one of August's device, the one that's supposed to kind of not replace but act as kind of Luke's mojo to some, or his Luke's tingle, and which August was like, how about we never use the term Luke's tingle? And Phil's like, yeah, man, I kind of see your point there. But Phil put it on and it just like, he got immediately overloaded. It's like, whoa, what the hell was that? And it's like, cool. It activated like that once Kay was in the office, but the moment she left, it didn't affect her anymore. So, I mean, it didn't affect the device anymore. Luke wasn't too happy about having to, hook it up to him on itself on his first date, which the moment he got around Kay, it activated, but he immediately took it off because I think he's so entranced with her where it's just like, oh, I'm not even going to pay that any attention. Like it probably throws out a lot of your reasoning in that moment where it should have been like, oh, that's probably, and she's also being spooky about the whole, oh my God, look at the blood moon. It's like, oh, yeah, I was like, that seems too conspicuous. And then we saw the attic where she has kids chained up and is draining their blood. I'm like, okay. Luckily, August and Phil show, because Phil felt like this all seemed a little familiar, especially with like the kids that have been going missing, and he put two and two together after some research. So luckily they showed up. What I think is interesting is even August was kind of getting seduced for a minute there, but Phil wasn't. Now I don't know how to read that, whether that's just like, well, I mean, Phil's gay, so I don't know if that was my immediate thought. Like, is that what that is? I mean, I think even a priest would still be affected, but like, I mean, he was able to kind of snap August out of it because I guess she wasn't able to kind of sink her teeth into you, metaphorically speaking, but like charm you enough. Like she was busy trying to act it. I mean, I think that's so interesting. Like, I guess other than kind of wooing you, she doesn't really have any like offensive abilities, because she was just like, I mean, I guess because she immediately kept going for Bath no matter what, because I guess she thought, right, I'll be able to charm you and there'll be no, like, you won't be able to stop me. So I don't really need to hurt you. All I need to do is like put you in a trance and just drag you away, like lull you into this trance. That's about it. But it might also be a thing of, it's probably like, well, once she starts, she can't stop. So she couldn't do much other than let her thing do its thing. But like I said, August maybe just didn't get enough wasn't around her enough to be fully tranced. So Phil was able to snap him out of it. But also, like I said, Phil didn't seem like he was affected at all. But they blocked the moonlight. I guess it's like by blocking the moonlight, you interrupt the ritual. And she's always on, like every blood moon, she needs to regenerate or she dies, because it's what keeps her young. But by stopping the process, like I think it finally catches up to her and she like grew old and died. So luckily all the victims that were taken this episode and Luke were saved, so it all worked out. And it's like, I love Phil's joke of like, yeah, she's kind of a little too old for you, buddy. He's like, yeah, but redheads. Like, homie, I get it. But either way, I brought it up earlier that the cases kind of had that parallel where what Zoe was up to and how she resolved things and everything with Luke, because he was like, oh yeah, because the Eric guy, the moment he found out there was like bloodletting sacrifices there, he was like, yeah, me building a tennis court there, the guy was like, me building a tennis court there will be honoring them. It's like, Jesus, dude, shut up. Like, kind of spinning that however you can. It's just, Luke just kind of making the point of just kind of like the client's a client and kind of do what you got to, and sometimes you kind of don't have to really do much. You just, they kind of spin their own logic and reasoning for the proper getting what they want or what they believe they want or what they need type of thing. So I do think it's also interesting. Like, I wonder, is this Luke's first time at Funland since last season, since he couldn't see his dad? Because I don't think he went earlier this season, right? So, I mean, obviously there's a lot of people around, so I almost feel like, oh, that's kind of a good thing. I mean, granted, Susan had set up this whole thing, this whole play coming here and everything was her idea, so I don't because I'm trying to remember, like, do correct me in the comments down below. Luke never went here, like, until, like, after hours, because that's where he'd be with his dad, but, like, I don't think we've ever seen him there during hours. Maybe we haven't, I'm just not remembering once again. I did not take time to rewatch season 1, so I could be misremembering, but I think it is nice that, like, to have everyone there with him, August, Phil, and Zoe, and so this was kind of a thing that was kind of mandatory. They couldn't bail out of it, despite Zoe wanting to. But they noticed that Susan's not there. Because Susan, called Luke earlier in the episode, being like, yeah, I'm going to take a couple more days off. I was like, that's probably going to be an issue. Because I'd almost wondered, I was like, did Luke actually get the message? But then he listens to voicemail at the beginning of the episode. He's like, Toodles. I was like, okay, so he definitely got the message. I was like, well, to be fair, I was like, I know the house needs Susan to be alone. But she was enjoying, like, the couple days away, relaxing, and it's just like, it's so good. And she was able to kind of be a little passive-aggressive with Luke, and it felt nice. But then, like, now she wants to leave, the house doesn't want her to. And he's like, oh, we've grown so close together. And then it starts shrinking in the walls, and it looks like she literally got stuck in the walls. That was, like, such a creepy, like, scene to end on when, like, she's, like, stretching, like, dude. I like that in, like, supernatural stuff of, like, just stuff going through the wall like that. I always love that spooky imagery of that. So it then begs the question, okay, so did, like, the house literally fuses you with, once again, we don't know this house's circumstances, but it's like we've bonded, we've grown so close. Once again, we know this place has history with Susan, specifically her dad, so we got a flashback of, I think, last episode of her dad working on something, her being with her dad in the area, but I'm like, beyond that, maybe we'll dive a little bit more in the past of not only this place, but also Susan and her dad a little bit. I don't know what to fully make of that. Because eventually the crew is going to be like, right, Susan's not the type, despite everything, she would never, like, just kind of abandon all of this. So they'll probably try and stop by the house. But I could definitely see the house pretending to be Susan, like they'll try and call. It picks up and is like, oh, hi, yeah, look, I just need a couple more days. And I'm like, I could easily see that being the case, so I'm interested to see where that storyline ends up taking. Because I had brought it up earlier. I was wondering if that was going to be like a major overarching through line, just like the house Megan was in, was like the major overarching through line last season. So I was curious if this house is going to be in that similar vein. It's been a couple episode arc, so we'll see if that continues. It feels like because they've made it a couple episodes of a thing, it feels like it'll be the entire seasonal arc, but we'll have to wait and see if it's something that gets resolved, at least by the halfway point in the season, which will obviously be next episode, but still. But like I said, I'm excited to see where all this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.